So to summarize all the points, Moses is raised in the family of Pharaoh. Dadhichi is close friend of King Kasuva. Moses strikes and kills an Egyptian. Dadhichi strikes King Kasuva himself. Pharaoh seeks Moses for retribution. King Kasuva strikes Dadhichi with a thunderbolt in retribution. Moses flees to rural Midian. Dadhichi goes to the forest to regroup. Moses is visited by Yahweh there, who gives him specific powers for the conflict. The ability to change his staff into a snake, to make his hand leprous, and to turn water to blood, and also gives the promise of protection and deliverance to the land of Canaan. Dadhichi is visited by Shiva there, who gives him specific powers for the conflict: adamantine bones, impossibility of being killed, and absence of distress. Moses returns, and the conflict now takes the form of a magical and divine competition. Moses and Aaron, empowered by their God, compete with the Pharaoh's magicians. Dadhichi returns, and the conflict takes the form of a magical and divine competition. Dadhichi's patron god and King Kasuva's patron god face off. Yahweh unleashes plagues one by one, the Nile turning to blood, darkness, hail, pestilence and boils, flies and locusts, the killing of the firstborn, etc. Vishnu and other gods unleash divine weapons one by one. The plagues also match some of the portents from right before Daksha's sacrifice, which occur close by in the same story. Darkness, locusts and moths, weather phenomena like whirlwinds and earthquakes, fire and lightning, becoming ill and vomiting blood, similar to a pestilence, and raining blood. Moses turns the Nile to blood, and Yahweh kills all the firstborns of the Egyptians. A different sage, Vishvamitra, who is in a similar feud as Dadhichi's, turns the Saraswati to blood. He also kills all the sons of his rival, Vasistha, during the same feud. Moses takes a bunch of hyssop and makes a sign with 3 stripes, which defends from the divine wrath. Dadhichi takes a handful of kusa grass and makes a sign of a trident, which defends from the divine wrath. Moses breaks the rock with his staff, unleashing the water and ending the drought. He incurs a severe sin for the violence of striking the rock. Dadhichi's bones become the Vajra weapon, which is used by Indra to slay Vritra, ending the drought. Indra incurs a severe sin for the violence of killing Vritra. Aaron's sister Miriam, while in the company of Aaron, speaks slander against Moses, which indirectly insults Yahweh, who has appointed him. For this insult, Yahweh's anger burns against Miriam. She is turned white and leprous, appearing as if her flesh is eaten away. She has to go out in the wilderness for 7 days before returning. While Sati, daughter of Daksha, is in the company of Daksha, he speaks slander against Shiva to her. For this insult, Sati burns herself in the sacrificial fire, leaving her body charred to ash. Shiva carries her out into the wilderness, and parts of her ash fall here and there. Moses is the sage keeper and dispenser of the ritual instructions and laws, the covenant and 10 commandments. Dadhichi is the sage keeper and dispenser of the ritual instructions of the Soma sacrifice, the Madhu Vidya, and in the Shaivite tradition, the 24 agamas themselves. When Moses is returning to dispense this knowledge, his face is transfigured, appears to be horned, and has to be veiled, but the horns are a poetic symbol for rays of light suggesting the sacrificial altar. When Dadhichi dispenses this knowledge, his head is replaced by the head of a horse, which suggests the head of the sacrificial horse, which is horned with rays of light. Aaron gives an illegal sacrifice of a golden calf against the ordinance of Yahweh. Daksha gives an illegal sacrifice using a golden vessel, intentionally excluding Shiva, the high god. Yahweh is up on his holy mountain at this time, speaking to Moses. Shiva is up on his holy mountain at this time, and Dadhichi has a vision of him there. Moses returns to the camp to find the golden calf sacrifice. He is the only one to speak out angrily at it. Dadhichi goes to the sacrifice of Daksha. He is the only one to speak out angrily against it. The complaint against the calf sacrifice is that it goes against Yahweh's ordinance of not making divine images and not worshipping other gods besides the one true God, Yahweh. The complaint against Daksha's sacrifice is that it excludes the transcendent and unifying god, Shiva. Moses grinds up the golden calf and makes the people drink the gold in water. Shiva shoots the sacrifice with an arrow, and then they make Pushan try to eat it, breaking his teeth. Yahweh sits back remote and orders Moses and Aaron to direct 3,000 of the Israelites to be killed, and then also sends a plague upon the remainder. Shiva sits back remote and orders Virabhadra and Bhadrakali to destroy the sacrifice and brutally maim the attendants. Aaron is blamed for putting on the sacrifice, but is forgiven quickly. Daksha is beheaded for putting on the sacrifice, but is given a new head and forgiven right afterward. Aaron is identified with the scapegoat by being the one to carry the people's sins on his head, and also being the one to pass them on to the goat. Daksha is identified with a goat as his head is replaced with that of a goat, this goat symbolizing both the forgiveness and blame that he has attained. Aaron's headdress is mysteriously depicted having the shape of 2 horns. Daksha is said to have both horned deer and horned goat forms at different points. He is the sacrificial officiant, a role depicted as a man wearing horns in art going back to the Paleolithic. Yahweh's presence leaves the Israelites after the golden calf episode for a time, and the people ritually mourn his absence. Shiva goes mourning into the wilderness with his dead wife's body for a time, which probably marked the ritual and seasonal absence of his presence during the onset of summer. Thus, Aaron is a humanized translation of the god otherwise known as Cernunnos, as Moses is of the semi-divine sage Dadhichi. Both are horned, but in different ways, and now we know why. From what was apparently originally a myth about monism centered on the Shiva-type god, the biblical version shifted the emphasis to fatefully transform this theology from monism to hostile monolatry or monotheism, removing the other gods entirely from the story by absorbing them into the actions of Yahweh or by casting them as humans, such as Aaron and the other attendees of the golden calf worship. One of the most surprising and perhaps revealing aspects of this comparison is how different the biblical version is from either the Ugaritic or Sumerian version of the myth, which we would expect it to be most similar to. The biblical version lacks the motif of the god being scolded for not standing at the feast, which links the Ugaritic, Sumerian, and Vedic versions, and in general, the biblical version is presented very differently from the nearby Mesopotamian versions. Instead, the biblical version appears to match most closely the version from the Indian tradition, even aligning beat for beat on sizable stretches of the narrative and one idiosyncratic poetic symbology. The only conclusion I can draw from this is that the biblical and Indian version came well preserved from a clear shared root not too far back, and more realistically, that the biblical version was borrowed and reshaped from an Indo-Iranic source of some kind. This could have occurred as far back as the Mitanni era in the 2nd millennium BC, or as late as the Persian period of the 6th century BC or thereafter. What is peculiar is that this is a Rudra Shiva type myth, but the monolatristic god of the Zoroastrian Persians is not the Rudra Shiva type, but his opponent, the Prajapati type. The destructive spirit who is the enemy of their chief god Ahura Mazda, that is Ahriman, is instead the Rudra Shiva type. As we can see, Ahriman has the same myth as Odin when he kills Ymir, and Ahriman's only creation is the peacock, a symbol of Shiva and his son. Indeed, it should be obvious that the hostile and destructive spirit Ahriman is the destroyer god Rudra. So, roughly speaking, the Zoroastrians demonized the Rudra Shiva type and centered instead on the Prajapati type. This tells us that the Exodus myth, which is based on the transcendental elevation of the Rudra Shiva type instead of the Ahura Mazda Prajapati type, could not have been borrowed from Orthodox Zoroastrian Persians. The myth was apparently even suppressed in Zoroastrian myth, as I find no example of it surviving in Iranic sources, even though it survives in almost all other branches. The Exodus had to have been borrowed from some fringe group of Persians in the west or south who had not become Zoroastrians at that time, an anti-Zoroastrian group who extolled the Shiva type instead, similar to the Yazidis who we know survived all the way till today. And if anti-Zoroastrian Iranic people were not the source, then an older Iranic source from before the rise of Zoroastrianism must be entertained, such as the Mitanni or their descendant peoples. If these are not the source, then a miraculous, long-shot borrowing from India would be the final possibility, though seeming unlikely. What is incredible to contemplate is how fully this myth of Dadhichi and Daksha covers nearly the entire narrative of Moses and Aaron, more so than any other proposed source has been able to do thus far. And also the fact that this is a prominent and famous mythos of Shiva, and it has not been realized that it is the match for the Exodus. My book, Taliesin's Map, is available from Amazon. Link in the description. Make sure to like and subscribe for more groundbreaking mythology videos.